Hi, welcome to the School Community Huddle with Ana Martinez. Today we have two very special guests. We are focusing today on special education. So for those of you that don't know what special education is, then this is for you. And those of you that have a child in special education, this is for you. And those of you that are administrators and teachers who serve students with special education, this is for you. So please introduce yourself, guests. Introduce yourself and just the number of years of teaching that you've had.
So I'm Brianna Richards. I am an education specialist and I've been teaching for 6 years.
Hi, I am Candace Smith. I'm an educational specialist and I am entering my 14th year of teaching.
What is an educational specialist?
Go for it, Candace.
So I honestly never called myself an educational specialist until maybe like 2 years ago. And that was strictly because of credentialing. I just always identified myself as a special education teacher. And one day I literally looked at my credential and it says that you're an educational specialist. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds good. So I'm an educator that specializes in a particular area. And for me, it was a mild to moderate students with disabilities.
Great answer. You are a special, we are all kind of education specialists in some way.
Right.
Exactly.
So this thing of special education, right? People, I think, have a stigma about it or they have their own understanding of it. Can you explain what special education is in like the most general terms for families to understand or someone who doesn't have the space?
So special education a lot of the times gets thought of as a place and a different setting other than a general education school or setting, but it really is written as a service for students who have exceptional learning needs in schools. And there's also a continuum of, depending on the exceptional needs, there could also be a separate placement, but a lot of the times it's a service that schools are providing.
Right. It's a very specifically designed type of instruction that is at no cost to parents, that meets, the unique needs of that child with a disability.
And these disabilities parents range from all kinds. It just means that your child needs special support or different support, or different learning structure or modality.
Right.
Information. It does not mean they're less smart. It does not mean they're not good at school. It does not mean that they will not go to college and succeed as adults, because many of our students in special education become adults that are super brilliant and successful.
Right.
So it is an expectation too. You think that it's going to be something, that's what the students will give you, right? So you want to make sure that you are always having high expectations of your child and you're always finding ways to support your child in the best possible way.
And I think too that over the years and just historically, special education has always had a very a negative stigma, as Brianna was saying. So a lot of times when you hear special education, people will either whisper it or think very okay, well, what do you mean something's wrong? So it's an immediate, a negative connotation associated with special education. And in the eyes of two people that this is their life, it's probably one of the most beautiful experiences that you can have with a child, to see them in an area where they may have been challenges, all of a sudden things just click like that. And that's for even students that have not been identified with disabilities. We all have different ways of learning, even as adults. And me, I can tell you right now, I'm a visual learner. You can tell me things 10 times, but I still need to see it in order for me to process it and make that connection. So it just means that your learning and how I'm educating you is very specific to what your needs are.
So good. So let's talk about how, before I think we transition into how students with special needs are experiencing or affected by this change to virtual learning, let's talk about the ways, maybe certain ways that you would have given services in the regular school setting.
So it depends on the model that the school has, right? But a lot of the times in a completely inclusive general education setting, there are no separate classes. Students with disabilities are in their gen ed classrooms, and special education teachers and classroom teachers are working together to collaborate on instruction and to provide those specialized supports that students need in their classroom and at different times outside of their classroom, depending on what the students' needs are.
And that's the purpose of having a collaborative team when you are building that IEP. It's literally an individualized educational plan. And so when you as a team are coming together to collaboratively discuss the best supports for that student, you're thinking about what they need, how it needs to be delivered, and who's going to be participating and collaborating together to make sure that that plan gets implemented effectively.
Now, before you say, that actually sounds good for my child, or my child's struggling, maybe I need an IEP, or they need an IEP, or they need special ed services, let me first give you this fact. In our country, like Candace said, there's a stigma with special education, and there's like a shame around it. And we don't actually show others how to have patience with it, because we've had a lot of experiences with parents that are like, I don't want my child in special education.
Right.
My child in a classroom with kids with special education, or teachers that are like, I'm not teaching that child. And they're all of our children, they just need different. And work maybe because we have to change the modalities from, instead of just like directive teaching, to like different modalities that are good for all children.
Right.
But here's the other fact. Black boys and immigrant children are actually referred to special education at higher rates.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not less smart. They might have different struggles. They might have different needs, but yet we're stigmatizing them as special education. And if a student really doesn't belong in special education, it does something to their mental model,
Right.
identity as a student. Did
It
you have anything you want to add to that?
It absolutely does. Historically, special education has always been overrepresented with a large amount of African American and Latino boys. And a lot of it has to do with, in my opinion, a lot of it has to do with the cultural aspects of educators not necessarily being prepared to teach children of color. And so a lot of it comes from a very generic teacher education program that is not inclusive of culturally responsive pedagogy and knowing how to address the specific needs of those marginalized populations of students. So when they come into the classrooms and they come into those learning spaces, they look at their behavior as something that is negative or something that needs something very specific, but in actuality, that may be a very cultural thing. It may be very much that this is how I respond. I never had to raise my hand before. I just speak out and say what it is that I need to say. So instead of me saying, sit down, you don't need to do this, I, as the educator, need to recognize that, oh, this is his level of participation. It doesn't mean that he's hyperactive. It just means that I need to channel my response to him and respond to him in a different way, not automatically think that there's something wrong, there's a behavior, he needs an IEP. And historically, that has been what has happened. So that's why you have this over-representation of Black and Brown students that are being referred for special education. And it stems from us as educators and how we are supporting those marginalized populations.
I think it also stems from like the understanding of what a child is supposed to do in school and what school is supposed to look like and how it's feel, and the very like standardized way of that does not really account for differences. It doesn't account for just people having different backgrounds and coming to the school building with different stories and being able to live out their stories authentically. And the idea of like conformity comes up, or just like if you're not able to conform to what the classroom standards are, then you're labeled as different. Different's not good. Maybe you need an IEP. And that trajectory doesn't help our kids if that's not what they need.
Right.
This is where equity comes into play.
Right.
And we're not trying to bring in conversations of racism or race, but for years, educators in our country know, and so do the people who write legislation, that there's an overrepresented representation of Black and brown boys in special education. And when we're labeling as special education at a very young age, then the adults that receive these students start to believe that they're not as smart or they are special education, when in reality, maybe it was a behavior piece. Or for some of our immigrant Latino students, they don't know the language, so they don't have piece, and we don't have the right training to teach diversified learners. And so there's a lot of complexities, but I do know that there's a lot of educators that do so much. And there are kids with high needs like autism, mild and moderate needs, right? Visual or like illnesses or health impairments that do affect the way and is conceptualizing learning. So let's not negate that there are still a lot of students who are in need, right?
Yeah.
Wondering about, hold on 1 second. So let's transition us into thinking about how have they experienced this change to virtual learning? How has that affected students with special needs?
It's been a huge impact. I think that the pandemic overall has like really like exacerbated so much in the inequities that we have in like our public system, our political system, our education system. And so it's just like opened so many eyes to so many things. Our kids are listening, they're watching, they're feeling. So all of the things are happening. And for them, they feel like so many things have been taken away from them. And they've had to adjust to changes that they're not used to having to adjust to before. They miss their friends, they miss their classroom, they miss their teacher. School is an escape for a lot of kids. So it's been very difficult for them to process this new way of learning. Some of our kids go to school to eat. So, we're talking about inequities. We kind of have to talk about all of it. So some of our kids literally go to school to have meals, to have, a place to be safe away from their home environments. And now they're in their home environments all day. So on top of that happening, now they're having to sit in front of a screen and learn and listen and focus. One thing I was listening to Dr. Tyrone Howard a couple of days ago, and he further just kind of, put a stamp on some things that I had been thinking about. And he made mention, he said, we as educators have to make sure that we kind of just have some grace for our kids right now. They're going through a lot. And when you are asking them to turn on their screens, you have to be okay with you being welcome into their home. And a lot of time kids don't want us to see what they have going on at home. They don't want us to see their furniture. They don't want us to see their families in the background. They don't want us to see those things. So we as educators have to be mindful that if he doesn't have his screen on today, maybe I need to talk to him separately and kind of connect and find out what's going on, because maybe the next day he will, or maybe the next day he will. So there's so many things that our kids are dealing with, and learning is a priority, but who they are and what they need needs to be number one.
Absolutely.
So good. So I'm thinking about, so this change is hard for students with special needs. A lot of students, general education students, thrive on routine, right? And they need that. It gives them a sense of security.
Yeah.
So we just took away their sense of security and gave them, for most of them, right? And like they have a whole new mental model of what school is. And we as educators have a whole new mental model of what school is. And what I'm noticing is we're continuing to try to put a circle into a square, right? A model of what we knew school was in this new environment. And I appreciate that you're like, they might not turn on their cameras and they might still be engaged, or they might need us to connect in a different way. I'm also wondering, like, what other supports do students with special education needs? What do they need right now? Or how can we help them to make this transition smoother for them?
I think something that I've experienced a lot with parents, for students who have academic services, but they also have speech services. They also have occupational therapy or counseling. And we still have to provide all of those services via virtual learning. And they, especially in the beginning in the spring, were on Zoom 4, 5, 6 different times a day with multiple Zoom calls. And then 2 weeks go by and the parents are like, I don't know how to support them with all these calls, and it's too much on top of the work that they have to do. So I think in terms of like coming together and really having conversations with each other about like, how can we co-treat? How can we minimize the amount of times they have to log in, log out, show up for these Zoom services, and still provide like what they need academically, but also remembering like we've never learned this way before, and being on Zoom multiple times, especially for elementary school students, is hard and a lot. And I think listening to parents and that feedback was really helpful, and it just keeps like me mindful of how many times the kids are logging on, and if we really need to have that extra group, or can I have it in a different way where they're already on and I don't have to add extra to their plate.
Right. Thank you for that. I also want to say to all the viewers, that was my 90-year-old grandpa in the background. And it's a Saturday because I'm working around educator schedules. And so Saturday mornings, you might watch this on a Tuesday, but these two women are giving up their Saturday mornings. And my family has a rotation of who comes and helps grandpa as a caregiver. And so today was my turn. And so I'm here filming, which is another example of like, we don't know what everybody is holding. And we are asking to do work. Obviously, this is my passion project. I want to get this information out there, but don't be embarrassed. Don't be feeling a need to present or create something, parents. Like, you need help. We're here to give that to you.
Absolutely.
The state of California gave something called CARES Act funding. That means they give a lot of money to school districts and schools. But if you don't speak up as a parent, like, this is what I need, technology, Wi-Fi, therapy, like whatever it is you need, then the school's not going to know to accommodate to that. So we're in this together. Like, we're all struggling. We're all in this. And so I think we need to also like challenge the mental model that social media gives us of like, things are perfect. Mm-hmm. So for a special education parent, that has to be really stressful when they're seeing like first day of school and
right.
A student with autism that needs things to be the same. It might be struggling more, or it might be thriving because
right.
they need to be around other people. Right. Mm-hmm. So how does a parent start to understand their special education learner? What can they do?
So I think something that I have always been a very, very big fan of is educating my parents. I've had a lot of sidebar conversations over the past 14 years, and I have to remind parents, you are their first advocate, not us. So as long as you understand that and realize that, you are the champion for change for your child. It starts with you. You know more than us as a team what your child needs. So that's why we need you to come in giving us all the information, not withholding things from us and having us find out things later on. Tell us now so we know how to support your child. And also advocating, and also just connecting to what you were saying, was that if you need something, you have to say something. We don't know until you say something. We can't wait until we are now entering week 2 and you're telling us that you don't have the login for your kid and they missed the first 4 days of instruction. You have to communicate with us. And so I would advise parents to really just stay connected and really like be mindful of the needs of their child. And sometimes they don't know what that is. And it's okay. Mm-hmm. I have children too. I have school-age children at home, and sometimes I don't always know what they need. And it's really important to sometimes just sit and listen. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I'm continuing to work on as an educator and as a parent. But you just have to listen. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they will tell you or they will show you what they need. And then you can figure out a way to get them what they need and say, hey, Ms. Richards, I realize that through this distance learning, what we talked about before in his IEP is not working at home. can we change that, or can we add this accommodation because I'm realizing he does need a visual schedule, or he does need to have this, or can we use the same schedule here at home that you're using with him in your breakout session so that we have some like consistency across home and school. You have to speak up and say something. I've had so many parents over the years leave IEP meetings, sign them an agreement, and come back and say, Ms. Smith, I still don't understand.
Yep.
No. If you don't understand
Tell
in
us
the
then.
meeting, tell us right then.
Yep.
I need you to slow down. I need you to explain that again. Or you use the terminology because you guys are so used to whipping out all these acronyms that you forget that I don't know what that means. This is my first time even, this is an initial assessment. My kid has never been assessed before. I don't even know what you're talking about. So we have to be mindful of that and help educate our parents and let them know that they lead the charge for this whole process for their kids.
I was going to say, similar to what you were saying, Candace, about the terminology, like even if you don't know to ask for a visual schedule or to ask for the specific accommodation, like even if you're like unfamiliar of what to ask for, I think just starting to ask for something or ask for help or just say they can't do this, they can't do that. And then as educators, that's our job to ask you the questions to get to like, okay, what do they need? And you don't have to know right then and there, like what the name of the accommodation is. We can help you figure that out.
So good. And I think my mom's in the background talking. So I think we also, teachers listen to this. So I'm also thinking about the mindset that general education teachers have with education specialists. And like sometimes that doesn't feel like the most constructive or positive relationship. And sometimes it works really, really well, right? How can a general education teacher make that relationship work really, really well?
So I think that may be one of the reasons why I've never said I'm an ed specialist. Is because we as special education educators are always looked at as the experts. And a lot of times when I've had conversations with general education teachers about a student that we both may be supporting, they're almost at a loss. And sometimes it's very scary for them and nerve-wracking for them, and they're kind of just like, Miss Smith, can you, I don't know what to do, can you just kind of give me some ideas, or how can I support, I don't know what to do with him, he's having a very difficult time with reading. And so my question is always to them, let's take the IEP off the table. If you had a student in your classroom that was struggling with reading, how would you support them? And so don't be afraid of the label. That would be the biggest thing that I would tell a general education teacher, is to not be afraid of the label. Look at the child and look at what their needs are. Fully embrace them as a whole child. Don't look at them separately from the other students in your classroom, because I've had students that I've supported that were thriving, and there were students in their classrooms that were not students with disabilities that were struggling. And so I'm like, where's your toolkit? You have lots of experience, support that child. And once those conversations started happening, I think the relationships started to come together a little bit more, and it became more of a collaborative process, more so than here, this is your student, can you support him here? And then, you know, because he can't keep up here. And so it needs to be more of, this is our student, how can we work together to support his needs? Do you want to look over his IEP together? Let's go through it so that you understand it. A lot of it is a lack of understanding, and a lot of it is fear. And once they get over that, it's like, oh yeah, you know, because she needs the same thing too. Great. So why don't you put them in a group together when you're doing your differentiated instruction in your small groups during your reading block anyway. You don't have to send them to the resource room, because what we want to do right now is we want to increase those inclusive opportunities in here.
Yeah, I was gonna say exactly the same thing.
You're like, same.
The word about just our student, and it's not like I know best. It's more like we both have something that we bring to the table for this child. So how can we talk about it and figure out how to move forward. And it's the same with parents. Like, we all have something to bring forward for the child's benefit, and we have to talk to each other to figure out what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. I appreciate that. Like, let's see this child as a learner first instead of the label of special education. And I teach you, teachers, you're stressed out. Parents are stressed out. The kid is stressed out. We're all stressed out. And we still have to give this service to the kids. And sometimes we don't know. We actually don't know how this learner works best. We might know what strategies students with autism need, but a lot of it is like trial and error and their own little mini personality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the nuance comes in, and ed specialists handle multiple grade levels, multiple kids with multiple needs. And I think that we don't always understand that fully as general education folks. And I think the opposite is also true. So like, one, people freeze and it's like, do something. And the parents also do something, instead of like, I figured out that this works at home, and I figured out this works in my small group, and I figured out this works in the generation education classroom, and then having that conversation for the sake of the child. But the other is true, where I've seen we overcompensate by doing everything for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
We want to break every little thing, every little skill, and overteach. And that's also a mindset of like,
Mm-hmm.
do we think they can't? And so true, right? Like, oh man, we call it in Spanish the pobrecito complex. Like, poor kid. Like, in reality, we're not creating independent learners, which is also an equity piece. So it's like, and so teachers might be listening to this and be like, well, I'm darned if I do, I'm darned if I don't. And I'm thinking there's a sweet spot. And you got to have grace with the fact that there's not a formula when you're dealing with human beings.
Yeah.
Right?
I think too that if you had talked to me, say 10 years ago, this conversation would have been completely different.
Yeah.
I think that we as educators have to recognize that we have our own implicit biases. Let's just be honest. And I think that once we recognize those, then it helps us to kind of move forward and to move a little bit quickly into that sweet spot, as you were saying. I feel that a lot of times special education teachers feel that we are like the savior, and we're the only ones that can get that student to read, to get that student to be engaged, to get that student, moved up in grade level. We've moved them to a different reading level. They're reading independently now. Like, we feel like a lot of times we're the only ones that can do that. Or let's take them here, just bring them to the resource room. It's fine. We'll work on it in here because they feel more comfortable in here. But we have to move away from that. We have to move more into more collaborative and more like inclusive opportunities for students, and get away from my kid, I can do it over here, to let's do it together to support him or her here in this environment, and let's work together. It can't be the days of past where we're separating this. And I think once we kind of shift that as well, those stigmas will start to kind of break down a little bit more. It won't be such a, oh, my student has an IEP and they don't want to talk about it in front of other parents, or they don't want to say anything, in front of, other teachers, or it's like this is quiet closed door meeting about what's going on with my child and the way in which they learn. We have to get away from that. And if they're in the environment together, kids also become more empathetic to the students because it's normal. They see them every day. They're around them every day. They look at Miss Smith and they know, because before they would be like, oh, she's going with Miss Smith. Okay. And that's not even me telling anybody what I do or whatever. The kids know, know everything. So you have to be very observant and very like aware of what's going on and the things that you're saying in front of students and to students. And it's very important. But if it's a collaborative and we come together, those things will become normal. It will be just how things are supposed to be.
Yeah. I think it also has to do a lot with the positioning of special education, because think about like the process for a student to get to an assessment. It's a lot of like, this teacher tried something, it didn't work. This teacher tried something in this grade, it didn't work. So it's like setting it up where multiple classroom teachers have to fail for us to get to this point where, oh, this student needs an IEP and that's the only thing that can help them. And it shouldn't be positioned that way, but I think a lot of the times the experience is like, well, I couldn't do it, and this other general education teacher couldn't do it, so the special education teacher is the only one that must be able to help this child, where it's not a collaborative effort, and then it turns into my kid versus your kid and that type of thing. And I think that is also has to do with a lot with what you're talking about, Candace, of the positioning of special.
Yeah.
And I love that you brought equity into this, because people should bring equity conversations into special education. And I love that you said 10 years ago I would have answered it differently. And then 10 years from now, I'm hoping I answer it even better or differently, right? So anti-racist work, equity work, you're never arrived.
No.
You know everything. You are constantly reflecting on your practices and your biases. I have biases right now. We all. So like, what mindset do I have about this child? Like, let me reflect on that. Not to be guilty, not to feel bad, but to say, is that bias actually getting in the way of how I can move this child or find what's best for this child? That is the true equity work, is the reflection piece. But people want to go quick to like a training or quick to read this book, and like, nobody's arrived, y'all. Like, part of it is the equity and the reflection piece. So exploring different things that might work for your student, your child, or having the conversation with, like, Miss Richards, that didn't work, or he's still having a tantrum or a meltdown whenever math happens, or the computer. And so exploring that, right, with the child and with you, because at a young age, you can start creating awareness with those children. Like, so I notice you don't like that. I'm going to give you some time. This is where SEL comes in. I'm going to give you some time to cool off. When I come back in 2 minutes, we'll talk about it. If he's not ready in 2 minutes, come back in 4 minutes. Like, be consistent. I think the piece here is that full-time working parents that don't have that time, that is the struggle, and that continues to be a struggle. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
It's rough. It's hard.
It's rough.
I could tell you when we first went into remote learning back in March, you can ask my daughter. I had a schedule on the wall. I had it color coded. I had, this is the time that you're waking up. This is this. We're going to connect it and match it to what your teacher is sending. I literally was business as usual. Within a couple weeks, I was like, are you serious right now, Candace? There's no way that you can continue business as usual. That was self-reflection on my part. And I had to realize that there was a shift for everybody. Her, my younger daughter, my husband, myself, we're all in the house together. We're all trying to work and do things. And I had to realize, like, I had to give myself grace and I had to give my kids grace, and realize that we're all experiencing this together. So if you don't get your math done right now, take a break, come back to it later. It's still going to be there. And I think once we as educators kind of do that as well too, things will start to shift. Before you start your lesson, before you start your small group or you do your mini lesson for the day, how are you? What do you need from me? How can I support you to get through this day or through this next 45 minutes? Start with that. That's why those things, like those social emotional check-ins, they need to be just that, a check-in, and they need to be frequent, and they need to be embedded in and out all day. We don't have to have something separate, like, oh, this is my SEL block. No. We do this all day, embedded through every bits of our curriculum all throughout the day. Your connections and your relationships with students, if you have that, you can get your students to do a lot more than what they give you. Just from relationships, Those things that you guys were talking about where Brianna was saying, this gen ed teacher tried something, it didn't work. This gen ed teacher tried something, it didn't work. By the time it comes to the IEP process, it worked, because you know why? Now I'm starting brand new. I have no biases about you. I don't know anything about you. I'm getting to know you as a learner, as a person, as a child. Let's start there, and I build from there.
So good. So good. This conversation, we're going to need a part 2, ladies.
Yeah, I'm like, we haven't even got to the other stuff yet.
I need to bring you back. I need to bring you back. This is so good. And it's not just for parents in special education. It's for teachers. It's for everyone. And so thinking about closing, a final advice or offering, it's an offering for parents. And I can start off, I think I can start off with this week, listening to principals in our some principal meetings, we were getting feedback, and we were just, the principal vulnerably said, we don't get enough, like, how can I support you? Or what do you need right now? And it was just like a click to me, like such a simple question. And I'm thinking about the next time your child is acting up or frustrating you, or you're frustrating yourself, or you're frustrated, ask yourself, what do I need right now? Ask your student, what do you need right now? Teachers, ask your students, what do you need right now? Because you're right. If we don't check on ourselves first, we can't be business as usual.
I was going to follow up with what Candace was saying about the check-ins for the students. I think in this time, more than ever, we have to have those check-ins with parents as well, and just figure out how are we connecting with parents all day or like multiple times a week. And if you're in a situation where you have a co-teacher or you have instructional assistants, like someone from the team has to check in with some parent at least once. So that way the team can tackle it together. And I think also making sure the gen ed teacher knows you don't have to reach out to all 30, 35 parents by yourself. Like, talk to the parents so that you can support the kids and support the families, especially right now.
That communication piece is so key, and like keeping the parents involved throughout the process, not just when something is wrong or when something is needed, or, James over here is just acting up and I don't know what to do, and I have a Zoom call myself in 10 minutes. Like, give each other space and grace, but it's really important for that involvement and engagement from the school community and the parents to be constant and be consistent. That's the only way that it's going to work, specifically more so for our students with disabilities that are already challenged by so many things, from just learning. They're not used to being on a computer all day. They're not used to not having their friends in their classroom, or, they miss going to the OT room, or having their speech teacher come in and do a group session, or having PE with their adapted PE teacher with their whole class. They don't have that anymore. So we have to keep those things in the forefront when those behaviors arise, or when those frustrations happen, or they get on the Zoom and they were fine and 10 minutes later they're crying. You have to just give them the space to feel all those emotions. And you know what? It's okay for us as adults to do the same thing. We have to give ourselves that same grace as well too. And when we need to step away, we have to step away. We're not going to be good for anyone if we don't take care of ourselves. So we have to do that, remind our parents of that, remind our kids of that, and figure out a way as a school community and as a learning environment to do that all the time, consistently, so it becomes normal. It's just something that we do.
So good. So good. I'm so inspired by both of you. I just want to say, parents, if you're listening, don't feel pressured for any of this. This is just information. And if you're listening to this and you're a parent of a special education student, or you're a teacher of a special education student, please put in the comments what you've tried that actually has worked, that's working for your kid, because you never know who's reading those comments.
Right.
I'll share that information because we're going to rise together. And sometimes you're more of an expert than we are in certain things.
Absolutely.
So let's rise together. Let's help each other out. And if you took away one thing from today, parents, then I did my job. Remember, you are enough. And I believe in you. I love you. And I appreciate that you're trusting us. But we also just trust you, and we appreciate you. So we're all in this together. Brianna and Candace, thank you so much. I'm going to have
You're welcome.
But thank you all. I'm signing off for today. Parents, until next time. Bye.